Symbaroum is waiting for you and your friends. The book in your hands is more than mere paper and ink. It is the gateway to another world, a world where you will get to explore the vast forest of Davokar in the hunt for treasures, insights, and fame. Where you may visit one of the 11 barbarian clans to trade or to plunder their treasuries. Where you can establish a base of power among princes, guilds, or rebellious refugees in the capital city of Indaros. Where you can fight for the honor of Queen Corinthia or ally yourselves with the ancient guardians of the forest. Whichever path you choose to walk, unforgettable adventures are waiting behind every crest and bend. The game world. The fantasy world where the player characters live both resembles and differs from our own. What differs depends on which role-playing game you play, but regarding the particular world of Symbaroum, you will, for instance, face laws of nature making magic and blessings real, creatures like elves, trolls, and lindworms, a level of development which in most aspects resembles that of late medieval Europe, and societies with steep hierarchies where the weak and the sick have a hard time surviving. The first section of this book contains an in-depth description of the game world. Other similarities between the worlds are that Symbaroum's world, like our own, has been shaped by a long history, that it has nature, cities, and villages, and not least that it is inhabited by individuals who firmly believe that the world around them is real and that their actions have real consequences. Sure, it is a fantasy world, but that is not something which the player characters and its other inhabitants are aware of. Freedom and immersion. Just as an encyclopedia or a post on the internet can never provide you with a comprehensive description of Sweden or the US, the Kingdom of Ambria and the Forest of Davokar contain a multitude of people, places, and phenomena which do not fit in this book. What is written herein must be understood as a mere point of departure for the adventures you will share with your friends. If you want to visit a place or a person that is mentioned in this book without being thoroughly described, it is up to you to discover, thereby describing it together. And remember that even if future modules added to this game will expand on the description of Ambria and Davokar, you always have the freedom to travel wherever you want in the game world. Like a steel-clad ship in a thundering storm, she cut through the waves of darkness and dread. I was there to bear witness. I am one of few who stood in awe as the first light of dawn got caught in her armor, transforming our young queen into a mounted, sword-wielding sun, Corinthia Nightbane, our sovereign slayer of the dark. The blood that was spilt, the lives that were lost, the tears that keep falling from red-rimmed eyes, the skies filled with ash, the soils turned to dust, the rivers transformed into muddy trenches. Such is the price we had to pay for the Dark Lord's betrayal, but also for the hardships that finally led us here, to the Promised Land. Strengthened and enlightened, we begin again. The children of Alberetor matured into the mothers of Ambria. The sorrow that blackens our hearts will be delivered in tears of hope and joy, not of grief and despair. We shall harvest the fruits of earth and forests. We shall harness the force of rivers and mountains. We will rise higher than ever before. To the pleasure of Prios, we shall ascend to a place where there are no shadows, where darkness is no more. Because we are the people of Corinthia Nightbane, and we will never be vanquished. Excerpt from Heraclio Atio's New Year's speech, The Triumph Plaza, Book 1, The World of Symbaroum. Welcome to Symbaroum, or to be precise, welcome to the region that in ancient times was ruled by the civilization of Symbaroum, an empire that by all accounts was advanced in the areas of architecture, spirituality, magical schooling, and the arts, a culture that without doubt suffered a both rapid and brutal downfall. This section of the book contains an overview of the region where the role-playing game Symbaroum is set, a region including the Kingdom of Ambria, the vast forest of Davokar, the naked lowlands west of the woods, and the mountain ranges marking its southern and eastern borders. What may be found outside this region will become the topic of future modules, although some information has been included here, not least about Alboretor, the land south of the Titans, which the Ambrian people have been forced to abandon. The reason for zooming in on a limited geographical area is that we are aiming for a presentation which is comprehensive rather than shallow, nuanced rather than sweeping. That being said, you will still find blanks and gaps in the text, topics we have been forced to exclude because of space limitations. But we hope and trust that the included material will prove to be enough for you to fill in the blanks yourself. This opening chapter covers the history, geography, and population of the setting, while Chapter 2 presents its most powerful factions. After that comes a chapter that introduces what arguably can be described as the heart of the game world, the forest of Davokar, followed by 3 chapters describing its most important population centers. The town of Thistlehold, Ambria's capital Indaros, and the forest plateau Kavosti, where the high chieftain of the barbarian clans reside. Thistlehold is the main base of Ambria's explorers and fortune hunters and is given a more detailed account, while the latter are portrayed in broader strokes, pending more exhaustive presentations in upcoming books. With the texts, images, and maps of this section, we hope that you will feel welcomed to the setting of Symbaroum. We would also like to invite you to contribute to its expansion. It is when this book reaches its readers that Ambria and Davokar truly begin to live and breathe, and we hope that you are willing to share your ideas, thoughts, and creations with the Symbaroum community. In this way, the improvement and development of the setting can become our joint venture. The return of the Queen, the Great War, the hungry hordes of the Dark Lords, a nightmare that lasted for 2 decades and which left little to hearten those who finally woke up. Instead, they had all the reasons to grieve. Tens of thousands had died. The maimed and broken were beyond count. The land was ravaged by death magic. There was famine and infertility. And even though the young queen had been rescued from the claws of the enemy, she had returned a shadow of her former self, with a lifeless mask covering her once radiant sunshine smile. 21 years have passed since the Dark Lords were vanquished, and the queen realized that her realm was dying. She was forced to lead her people to safer grounds, that much was evident. And before long, she was able to identify where to start anew. North of the mountain range called the Titans lay the fertile soils which, according to legend, were the ancestral home of her people. The time had come for Corinthia to claim her birthright. During the past couple of centuries, the region up north had been controlled by warring barbarian clans, and before that by the prosperous city-state of Lindaros. According to legend, Lindaros suffered the wrath of celestial powers, causing a most infectious bleeder's disease to wipe out its entire population. This occurred about 200 years ago, after which it took more than a century before the nomadic clans of the region dared approach the contaminated ruins. No more than a couple of months after the decisive battle against the Dark Lords, Corinthia's troops reached the region in the north. At Lindaros, they encountered a small barbarian settlement established by the clan Cadiz that had been evicted from its territory in Davokar 50 years earlier. After a siege that lasted only 3 days, the barbarian chieftain bowed before the superior power, and the work of rebuilding Lindaros could commence. a task that mainly was carried out by thousands of prisoners of war and as many so-called volunteers, men and women who were on the run from already dead regions in old Albertor. The Queen did not join the refugees until 7 years after the war's end. When she did, she declared that her new realm would be called Ambria, the Shining, and the increasingly well-organized capital was to be named Indaros in honor of Carinthia's father, the hero King Inadar. 3 years later, the Queen's armies also managed to overwhelm the barbarian warlord Haloban and his clan warriors, a triumph giving Carinthia and her people the opportunity to start exploring and harvesting the ample riches of Davakar forest. Much has happened over a short period of time, so there has been no room for subtleties. Disobedient barbarians have been killed, banished, or imprisoned by Carinthia's experienced and well-equipped soldiers. The obedient ones have been used for labor under slave-like conditions. The latter also holds true for many of Carinthia's own subjects, namely all those who came from the south without personal riches or sought-after skills. If anyone bothered to keep count of how many people have died in the process of building Ambria, the final score would be in the thousands. But no one does. To those who are alive, nothing counts but the remarkable result. Although the restoration of Indaros is far from finished, the city has grown to enormous proportions, and at the same time, Carinthia's knights have conquered all land between the mountains in the south and the woods in the north. Now the nobles of Ambria are starting to plan for new conquests in the north and in the west. 7 years ago, the uncrowned king of Ambria's treasure hunters, Lassifor Nightpitch, established the town of Thistlehold. The construction was largely financed by the reward Lassifor had received for an armful of dried twilight thistle, a rare herb, allegedly powerful enough to aid the gravely ill Abyssina, mother of Queen Carinthia. Ever since then, the walled settlement of Mayor Nightpitch has acted as a safe haven for Ambrians exploring Davakar, a forest full of natural resources and rich remnants of long-lost civilizations. Also a forest full of rampant abominations, dark-minded creatures of otherworldly origins, and a band of wardens most unwilling to welcome the damages done by human explorers. The Promised Land. The region Carinthia is determined to conquer is dominated by Davakar, a forest that in itself is as varied as a continent. Traversing the woods from Thistlehold to its northern edge would take weeks, if not months, and on the way, one would have to face beasts as well as hostile elves, blight-stricken abominations, and treacherous nature. South of Davakar, a rolling landscape of fertile plains stretches out. Where they are not ploughed by Ambrian farmers, they are covered by pale green grass or small groves where the birds and beasts of the lowlands find shelter. This is Ambria, a kingdom divided into 7 duchies encircling a domain ruled by the Church of Prios, the sun god, and the giver of laws. The Grand Duchy of Carinthia is by far the largest, just as the capital city of Indaros is larger than Thistlehold, Ravinia, and the high seat of the Sun Church, Temple Wall. The region is framed on 2 sides by towering mountains, the wild and majestic Titans to the south, and the Ravens to the east, growing taller and steeper the further south one travels. Aside from some mining colonies and the monastery of the Twilight Friars south of Indaros, the Ambrians are yet to establish any noteworthy settlements in the mountains. Instead, they have become a refugee for robbers, freethinkers, and rebellious barbarians. And as for the dwarven realm of Kuamzamok, its inhabitants appear to be totally indifferent to humans, with the exception of the few families that, for reasons unknown but wildly debated, have settled down in Indaros. The climate is colder and more humid compared to what the Ambrians are used to. Damp winds from the southern oceans climb over the Titans and are not the least embarrassed to drown Ambria in heavy rains, especially during the autumn. The winters are cold, with snow covering the streets of Indaros for a month or two, or even longer during the winters that the barbarians call Istaros, when Arctic winds sweep down from the north, so cold that hearths, which are allowed to go out, can barely be brought back to life, and the blood freezes in anyone who dares venture outside for longer than it takes to collect more firewood. The ways of life. Since long before the arrival of Corinthia and her subjects, the land north of the Titans was home to a motley array of creatures with diverse customs and an often complicated relationship to one another. The presence of the Ambrians has affected the people of the region in different ways, in part as a result of adaptation, in part as an effect of defiance, or at least a need to demonstrate some kind of uniqueness relative to the new lords of the land. This section offers a portrayal of the more or less cultivated creatures living in the woods and on the plains. The depiction is brief and therefore simplistic. In actuality, there are lots of exceptions to what is said below. But if you keep that in mind, the text should provide a relatively fair account of the people, culture, traditions, and conflicts of the region. People. In broad terms, Davakar and its surroundings are inhabited by three distinct groups of people: Ambrians, barbarians, and the elder folks, for instance, elves, goblins, and ogres. If you were to ask any single representative of one of those groups about such classifications, he would probably feel uncomfortable being lumped in with individuals that to him appear as more or less strange. But that does not alter the fact that there are some shared characteristics within those groups which make the categories justifiable. The Ambrians all stem from the dead realm Albaretor, south of the Titans. The Great War has made them tough, but also forced them to become disciplined and organized in terms of military and bureaucracy, as well as regarding trade and divisions of labor. In short, the war has civilized the Ambrians as a people, even though it may have brutalized many of its individuals. The Ambrians are capable and experienced when it comes to waging wars, but they are also characterized by a profound spirituality and an aptitude for refined skills and nuanced knowledge. Other than that, you will find a common quality in their ambitions. They are a people bent on conquest and ownership. They always strive for more and better, whatever it concerns. Nature is regarded as a resource, filled with supplies which can make life more comfortable, or in any case more tolerable, and many Ambrians would willingly risk life and limb in the hope of finding treasure, knowledge, or rare goods which could secure them a comfortable future. When it comes to the barbarian clans, they actually live in greater harmony since the arrival of the Ambrians. It is commonly accepted that the clan folks are descendants of Symbaroum, the civilization that ruled the region up until a millennia ago. There are, of course, huge differences between the clans in terms of lifestyle and customs, but in the end, they have much in common. What they share is probably best symbolized by the witches, the spiritual leaders of the clans and advisors to the chieftains. Under the guidance of the witches, the barbarians are fully aware that they are living in and consequently are depending on nature for their safety and survival. And they have all borne witness to what happens when one does not respect the taboos dictated by the Huldra, the head of all witches who lives on Kavosti alongside the High Chieftain. Finally, there is the vague category called the Elder Folks, including elves, dwarves, goblins, trolls, ogres, changelings, and others. A majority of the individuals sorted under this label tend to see themselves as nature's children rather than its owners or rulers. There are, of course, exceptions, not least among the goblins who have gotten a taste of Ambrian abundance and even more evident among the dwarven families living in Indaros. But by and large, the Ambrians and the elder folks are very dissimilar in this respect. The disagreement, not to say animosity, is most apparent in the conflicts between Corinthia's subjects and the elves of Davakar. With reference to a treaty that supposedly was signed by many human lords around the time of Symbaroum's fall, the Wardens of the Woods demand that all Ambrians stay clear of the forest. They even claim that an ancient alliance called the Iron Pact gives them the right to slay any human who violates the terms of the treaty, a claim that Corinthia and her knights scoff at, and which no serious treasure hunter takes seriously. Colonists and free settlers. Of all Ambrians, it is the colonists who have most contact with barbarians and the elder folks. Today, all land between the Titans in the south and Davokar in the north, between the Ravens to the east and the River Eblis to the west, is considered to be colonized by Ambria. But Corinthia's ambitions are greater than that. Indeed, a dozen new settlements have been established in places still ruled by other powers. A majority of these can be found up to a day's travel past the tree line of Davokar, for instance, on the southern shore of Lake Volgoma, or on the route between Thistlehold and Karvosti. Others are located in the mountains and at the forest's edge west of River Daudrum. Another group of southern origin that lives near the elves and barbarians are the free settlers, refugees from Alboretor who have taken the opportunity to break free and form societies of their own. These settlements are typically made up of 10 to 30 families that for some reason have chosen to stick together, in most cases because they profess their loyalty to some other deity than Prios. In the early days of Ambria, the free settlers had no trouble finding some corner of the Promised Land they could claim as their own. But with time, many have found themselves repressed by the expanding kingdom, and some have even been forced to move deeper into Davokar. Freedom from oppression comes at a considerable cost, a cost that gets higher and higher the further Corinthia's domain extends. Even so, there are still about 20 free settlements in forests and mountains that refuse to submit. Spirituality. Much changed in the wake of the Great War. The most radical change was when the sun god Prios went from being one of many accepted deities to being recognized as the One. Where the Dark Lords represented darkness and death, Prios came to most radical change was when the sun god Prios went from being one of many accepted deities to being recognized as the One. Where the Dark Lords represented darkness and death, Prios came to symbolize the light of Alboretor and the life-giving power of the sun. Or as Jezibagai, the current first father of the Sun Church, has expressed it. In the abyss, in absolute darkness, was the spark which gave hope to the world, the spark which in the care of we Ambrians will make Prios blaze as never before. Today, Prios is recognized as the giver of laws, or as the One, and almost all Ambrians adhere to his commandments, as conveyed by the priests and theurgs of the Sun Church. Prios is said to be everywhere beneath the heavens, and humans are tasked with cultivating his creation. Sadly, man has neglected this duty for a long time, which in turn means that Prios has lost much of his strength, so much in fact that he is dying. But according to the sermons, there is still hope. If humans strive to correct the error of their ways, if they work harder, extract more crops from the soil, harvest more and richer resources from forests and mountains, colonize more of the wilds, then Prios will grow strong again. In the quest to honor and strengthen the sun god, Davokar has a vital role to play. The wild, unruly forest is considered to be the perfect example of what happens when humans refrain from doing what they are obliged to do. Davokar must be cleansed, its potency disciplined, and its resources cultivated. It is to advance that quest that the Curia, the High Council of the Sun Church, sends missionaries as well as explorers to the depth of Davokar, and why they already have established a temple on Karvosti, the age-old thingstead of the barbarian clans. In the shadow of Prios, the abolished deities live on, gods that actually bear a striking resemblance to the deities of the clans. Concerning the religious beliefs of the barbarian folks, many a thurg and learned master have tried to describe and categorize the gods, spirits, and divine beings worshipped in Davakar. So far, they have not succeeded. Evidently, the clans are very dissimilar when it comes to how they relate to spiritual powers. As mentioned, some worship deities similar to the gods banished by the Ambrians. For instance, the serpent god Euron, revered by the Gaoya clan, shares features with the Ambrian Earth Mother. The Bayaga clan's bloodwolf Arex is clearly related to the Ambrian Pathfinder, and the spider Oroke, who is worshipped by many, has some qualities in common with the Executioner. But among the clans, you will also find worship of ancestors, holy grounds, beasts, and sheer monstrosities, like the bestial blood daughter of the clan Sa Khan. Regarding religious rituals, there are also great discrepancies between the clans, from collective prayer sessions to downright deadly customs, as when the members of Clan Enoi allow themselves to be bitten by venomous spiders in order to get closer to Oroke. The elder folks appear to have a more relaxed approach to spiritual matters. Instead of worshipping or praying to divine beings, they seem content with showing gratitude towards the spirits which, according to them, inhabit all aspects of nature. They give thanks to the stream for letting them traverse the rapid waters unharmed. They offer their gratitude to the hazel for letting its nuts fall to the ground. They whisper thank you to the deer for allowing itself to get trapped. It is said that Ilori, the elven emissary in Indaros, was asked about his beliefs during a visit to Queen Corinthia's court. His exact response is obviously only known to those present, but according to rumor he replied with an insult. It is a vain presumption to think that the world would care about being worshipped or that it would listen to prayers. It is a presumption which mirrors man's own desire to be worshipped and his expectation that he can force his will upon the world. The Hordes of Darkness. Despite the fact that more than 2 decades have passed since the victory, the Dark Lords and the Great War is ever present in the lives of the Ambrians. Usually, people only talk about the triumphs, about the heroic deeds of the Lightbringers, about how the armies of Corinthia massacred hordes of undead creatures. All else is repressed, not least that the Queen's soldiers were often forced to kill the same enemies again and again, enemies that in addition had been their brothers and sisters until they fell victim to the murderous magic of the Dark Lords. The ones who were there remember. Those who have nothing but stories to go on fantasize. But with the exception of ravings caused by nightmares or too much to drink, the Ambrians never talk about the fear and the horrors. No, Corinthia's subjects try their very best to look ahead, no matter how difficult life may seem. They are determined to grow so strong that no one dares attack them ever again. Cultural practices. Ambrians, as well as barbarians, are storytellers. The barbarian folk value a good narrator almost as highly as a skilled warrior, and the High Chieftain on Kavosti always has 1 or 2 select storytellers living in his fortress. These chroniclers are often chosen from among the participants of the annual contest held during the market days at the autumn equinox and are considered to have a special responsibility for remembering and recounting historical events. Aside from the telling of stories, the leisurely activities of the clans tend to involve weapon games and rituals, paying homage to nature. It would probably be misguided to describe the clan's relationship to Davakar in terms of worship, but under the guidance of the witches, all barbarians are careful to show gratitude towards the forest that feeds them and teaches them humility. In that, as in most other cases, the storytellers play a vital role, especially when it comes to cautionary tales that account for what may happen if one violates the taboos dictated by the Huldra. Among Ambrian storytelling takes many different forms. The bards and poets who perform in taverns, restaurants, and inns are very popular, but the same can be said about prominent actors, dancers, and artists. Within all these art forms, portrayals of the Great War are common. Tales about individuals who have pleased Prios, so-called light-bringers or martyrs, is another popular theme. However, in recent years, a newcomer has appeared on the Ambrian stage. Tales of Davokar, of fortune hunters who have found their fortune, of heroic encounters with arch-trolls and lindworms, of rich treasure chambers found in overgrown ruins. Additionally, the Ambrian storytellers have made it their business to visit their barbarian colleagues to learn popular stories from them, including the ancient poems attributed to the legendary Huldra Aroaleta. Aside from the Ambrians making use of more forms of storytelling, there is another significant difference between the groups. While almost all barbarians take part in the rites of the witches and listen to tales told around the fire, the Ambrian people are divided into a number of subgroups. The nobles have their own venues for dance, theatre, and music, and love to cover their walls in grandiose tapestries with themes from battles or nature. Merchants and craftsmen often visit the same salons, where they place themselves according to fortune and stature, since the prices vary depending on where you sit. Free, labouring Ambrians listen to tales told in the taverns, while thralls, serfs, and commoners in the countryside have to settle for the tall tales told by their elders as they assemble for the evening meal. Of course, there are exceptions, but the principle can hardly be questioned. The subjects of Corinthia are undoubtedly stratified in terms of both assets and interests. The Prophecy of Sarkomal. According to rumours circling both in Daros and Thistlehold, the Sun Church has recovered a prophecy from an old temple ruin a couple of days' walk east of Karvosti. First, Father Jezibagai firmly denies all knowledge of such a find, but that has hardly stopped the rumour mill from grinding. Quite the opposite. In a short time, numerous versions of the prophecy have appeared, all reflecting the same basic theme: Ambria is supposed to gain lordship over all land once ruled by ancient Symbaroum, and Queen Corinthia will ascend to the throne of the empire's last emperors. That basic theme aside, the versions differ greatly from each other. When it is supposed to happen, how it will happen, and whether or not it will be to the advantage of the Ambrian people depends on which version you choose to trust. There is really only one strophe which recurs in all versions, claimed to be translated by the Curia. Where night and day are without meaning, where darkness shimmers and light gathers in shadows, there stands the throne that again shall carry a mistress, a regent, a peer of the divine. But as previously mentioned, no one has confirmed the authenticity of that passage, nor of any other. And even if someone had, there is likely room for any number of translations and interpretations, as always when prophecies are concerned. Areas of conflict. Given that the three main populations in the region have such a disparate relationship to Davokar, you would probably conclude that the Ambrians always collide with the elder folks, and that the barbarians are caught somewhere in between. Of course, it is not as simple as that. There are lots of individuals who do not fit that mold. Ambrians who join the elves in their ambition to keep Davokar in peace, as well as single barbarians, elves, changelings, and ogres who have made their homes in Ambria. Nevertheless, the general climate of the region is one of open conflicts, characterized by the Ambrian ambition to explore and exploit Davokar and the elder folk's reluctance to let them do so. Presently, Queen Corinthia's people seem to be the unchallenged rulers of the plains between the mountains and the forest, and it would probably take an all-embracing pact of barbarians and elves to change that, but in the woods, the balance of power is more even. The Queen's army has a hard time functioning with full efficiency in the forest, while local knowledge and experience provide their counterparts with a great advantage. Furthermore, the Ambrians have a hard time confronting the horrors of Davakar on a unified front. Special interests linked to factions, blood, or personal gain are often given priority at the expense of the common good, not least when it comes to managing and distributing information, resources, and treasure found in the woods. The latter also paves the way for joint ventures involving a mixture of Ambrians, barbarians, and others. Instead of contacting factions like Ordo Magica or the Queen's Rangers, many dukes and barons have initiated collaborations with barbarian or goblin chieftains. And the wizards, scholars, and rangers tend to act in a similar fashion, better to pay the locals for help than to divide any profit or advances with other Ambrians. The only exception from this is the Sun Church, whose representatives are unwilling to mix with the creatures of the night. On the other hand, they engage in missionary campaigns and can, in that way, utilize the knowledge and skills of converted goblins, barbarians, and ogres. In other words, to give a clear-cut and straightforward account of the relationship between the peoples of the region is both difficult and fundamentally misleading. In order to understand how collaborations, quarrels, and armed conflicts arise, you have to take a large number of factors into account, not least the factions described in the upcoming chapter. Moreover, you must understand that in light of the escalating threat from the corrupt powers of Davakar, basic necessity may require the most unlikely alliances to be forged. Factions. This chapter offers a brief introduction to the most powerful factions of Ambria, along with a similarly short glance at the barbarian clans and the elves of the Iron Pact. In general terms, these groupings can hardly be described as harmonious. Power struggles are as frequent within as between the factions, and the goals of individual leaders may both alter with time and be contested by subordinates. But in the end, it is fair to say that power and influence are linked to the formations described below, and that one would have to be extremely clever to reach one's goals without having allies among the prominent members of at least one of them. Houses of nobility. Ambria, as Alboretor before it, is a hierarchical society, for centuries governed by an assembly of noble families called houses. The families are ranked based on their position in the order of succession, and the rank affects what offices their representatives may hold. Ambria is divided into 7 duchies, in turn divided into smaller domains called counties or baronies depending on their size. Formally, it is the Queen who appoints dukes, who then appoints counts and barons to manage subjects and land. But there have been lots of exceptions from that order of things. For instance, the Queen may nominate individuals to the title Prince of the Realm, a position which gives its owner a duke's power over a smaller piece of land. It is also rumored that the Queen, on a couple of occasions, has appointed counts against the will of the concerned duke, and that some of the counts command such authority that the people in the region show him more respect than they grant the official ruler of the duchy. Ranked first among the noble families is the royal house of Kohinoor, personified by Corinthia Nightbane and 5 of Ambria's 6 dukes, all of them closely related to the Queen. That may sound like a harmonious affair, but according to gossip and campfire tales, there are circumstances which complicate the situation. That the Queen's mother married a new husband, bore him the daughter Esmeralda, and then fell gravely ill is one of those. That Corinthia's only living uncle is bitter that he missed his chance at the throne is another. Furthermore, when the Queen's cousins are said to be incompetent, bordering on useless, and when the other houses long for an opportunity to dethrone the Kohinoors, anyone can see that Corinthia has had to re-examine the situation carefully before appointing the dukes of the Promised Land. On the other hand, one should not believe everything one hears. Provided that appearances are not tremendously deceiving, the rule of Ambria works as it should. There is steady progress in the development of the regions, the army stands firm in the face of Davakar's abominations, and new colonies are established every other month. And even if the rumors contain some small elements of truth, hardly anyone questions Corinthia Nightbane's ability to handle the odd domestic quarrel. Queen Corinthia. Head held high, and with unwavering confidence, Queen Corinthia carries the hope and sorrow of her people. She was not more than 12 years old when King Inadar died on the battlefield, but she did not hesitate to pick up where he left off. She inherited his mount, the legendary Master. She had his broken lance restored, and she led the forces of light on a 10-years-long counter-offensive against the armies of the night. 2 years before the end of the war, Master died, gravely wounded by a poisoned spearhead, and Corinthia was taken captive. The enemy celebrated without understanding that he had engineered his own demise. The desire to rescue the captured queen gave her knights such valor that not even death magic could make them falter. Corinthia was freed from her prison and commanded a decimated battalion of Templars in the decisive assault on the Dark Lord's fortress. The years in captivity and the death of her homeland have not broken Corinthia's spirit. Sure, her lacerated face is nowadays covered by a mask of glazed porcelain, but she is still the same, a triumphant warrior queen, given the honorary title Nightbane for her victory over the dark. The rumors claiming her to be weak or even dying, or the ones declaring that she actually died in captivity and that the woman behind the mask is someone else, are never spoken except in wheezing whispers and in the company of very close friends. Järnringen. The Grand Duchy of Järnringen is Queen Corinthia's domain, rich in rain, fertile fields, and not least in people. About 40% of Ambria's population lives between the mountains and the River Dudrum, and new refugees arrive every day. Although most of them are passed on to other provinces, especially to the colonies of New Berendoria, there are many who argue that the mountain passes should be closed off. And maybe they have a point. How much will the promised land be worth if buried under a tidal wave of disease scavengers? Mervidun. Mervidun is officially ruled by Abyssina, the seriously ill mother of the queen. In actuality, the domain is governed by Duke Cesario, the man Abyssina married during Corinthia's captivity and with whom she has the daughter Esmeralda. From his high seat in Mergil, he captains the trade in metals, granite and lumber. Products that, because of swift transports along the river, Nura have made Mervidun one of the richer duchies in Ambria. New Berator. New Berator is ruled by Duke Inadar, the son of Corinthia's brother Corian, who died while trying to free his imprisoned sister. Inadar, named after his grandfather, is no older than the Ambrian kingdom and governs a region that can boast of having great relations with the barbarians. The duchy also takes pride in the ingenious methods developed to extract fire oils from the wetland called the marshes, Seragon. When the immediate family is not enough to close the ranks, you turn to more distant relatives, in the case of Seragon, to the son of the former king's younger brother. The orphaned Duke Gadrame is accused of being a lackey who drinks more than he should, and who neglects his duties towards queen and country. But even if Seragon is poorer and more unruly than other duchies, its duke has so far managed to protect the Davakar border with flawless efficiency, despite the fact that his province borders the territory of the aggressive clan Karohar. Cassandrian. The queen's half-sister, the 17-year-old and very spirited Esmeralda, is the Duchess of Cassandrian. The city of Agrella is situated on the shores of Lake Ebel, making it a vital node for transports along the rivers, and the Duchess is also honored by housing the head office of Ordo Magica in her province. Aside from that, Cassandrian is famed for being influenced by Esmeralda's decree. The victorious dead shall be celebrated and praised, not mourned. Agrella is a city of eternal jubilation. Narugor. The Duchy of Narugor stretches along Davakar's southern tree line and contains the fortifications Otrasenja and Otradorno, underlining that Duke Junio Baraka has been given a special responsibility to stop the darkness of the woods from seeping out over Ambria. The Duke himself, a hero of the people whose accomplishments have hoisted him to a position of highest nobility, is an example of how the war's end and the migration have affected the previously rigid structures of the noble houses. New Berendoria. The popular belief is that Alisaro Kohinoor has not forgiven his niece, even if it was not her, but a group of military commanders and prominent nobles who prevented him from succeeding his brother. The fact that Corinthia gave him the Duchy of New Berendoria is hardly a comfort, since she probably appointed him to that barren and windy outback in order to get rid of him. Be that as it may, current reports from his high seat Savona state that Alisaro is making new friends among the western clans. Prios Domain. At the heart of Ambria lays Prios Domain, with First Father Jesse Bagai functioning as the steward of the sun god. Where Ambria's largest high roads intersect, the one between Indaros and Thistlehold, and the one between Kurun and Ravenia, rests Temple Wall, high seat of the Sun Church, surrounded by rolling plains where the crops sway in the wind and the cattle graze peacefully, assured that they are safe from harm. The Barbarian Clans. When the Ambrians arrived in the region south of Davakar, 13 barbarian clans were living in the area. Since then, 13 has become 11, as Clan Cadiz was subdued and integrated into the Ambrian civilization, and Clan Jazora was annihilated by Ambrian steel. Recently, there have been rumors circling about a possible 12th clan, the fiendish brutes of the Beast clan. But while the existence of such a clan is yet to be confirmed, and especially since the barbarians seem to be equally confounded by the flourishing rumors, Ordo Magica and other authorities are ignoring them, pending more reliable accounts. Lately, the relations between the clans have changed because of the arrival of the Ambrian people, but also because of the slowly but surely escalating threat from the beasts and abominations of Davakar. Reasons aside, the clan chieftains have all declared themselves to be aspiring for peace, and judging by appearance, they try to live up to that promise. Sure, it is still turbulent in some borderlands, not least up north as well as between Carrots and Vajvods in the east. But at the moment, the region is free from outright clan wars. The barbarian high chieftain, seated on Kavosti, is elected for life during a gathering at the Thingstead held when the reigning warlord is nearing death. But he is not elected to rule. Instead, the role of the high chieftain is to arbitrate or, when necessary, act as a judge in conflicts within and between the clans, and only if requested to do so by the clan chieftains. The chieftains must of course pay heed to the opinions and wishes of their subjects, but they have no obligations to obey or even listen to some superior power. So even if there are similarities to be found between them, each clan has its own structure of laws, customs, and hierarchies. What similarities exist can first and foremost be attributed to the witches. The leader of witches is called the Huldra, and just like the high chieftain, she resides on Karvosti. 4 times a year, at the winter and summer solstice, and at the spring and autumn equinox, the Huldra assembles the leaders of the clan's hex nodes, called keepers. It is said that the purpose of these gatherings is to discuss the state of Davakar, but according to rumor, much time is also allocated to talks about, and the search for solutions regarding, conflicts that officially are to be dealt with by the High Chieftain. The witches undoubtedly have a huge influence over the High Chieftain as well as over individual clan chiefs. so huge, in fact, that Levia Solage, a respected master of the order, claims that Yoletta, the current Huldra, has a greater hold over her people than Corinthia has over the Ambrians. Gaoya. The members of Clan Gaoya living furthest to the north are regarded as brutal and primitive, even by other barbarians. They are said to be allied with a lindworm called Grandfather Lint and are hardly ever seen in the south. The only exceptions are their rugged Wrathguards and the slightly more polished envoys that Clan Chieftain Rabayamon sends on a courtesy call to Kavosti every other year. Inoai. The Inoes are tree people, living in treetops or in caverns carved out under the roots of giant pines. One example of the latter is the legendary village of Inovac, where Clan Chieftain Corona resides. The settlement is comprised of about 50 households and a marketplace, all situated under the towering pine which shares its name with the clan. Godinja. Many of the masks carried by barbarians are made by the craftsmen of Clan Godinja. Its proud people claim to be the descendants of old Symbaroum's ruling elite, a belief that members of other clans question, but without indignation. Instead, outsiders point to the fact that the Gurds up until a couple of generations ago were closely associated with the elves of Davakar, and they are happy to echo the rumor stating that Godinja's clan chieftain, the mighty Vicoma, has elf blood coursing through his veins. Yedisa. Compared to their northern neighbors, the Yedis actually have better reasons for being proud. Of the last 10 High Chieftains, 6 have been fostered by Clan Yediza, including the current one. The reason for this may be that the clan long ago abandoned a nomadic lifestyle in favor of a few permanent settlements. Since the annihilation of Clan Jazora, Chieftain Leonard's stone fortress is clearly the most impressive construction of the barbarian people. Bayaga. Aside from them often being seen on both Kavosti and in Thistlehold, the Bayags are known for fighting alongside their tame bear beasts, called Bayagorns. They live in small groups that roam the clan territory, hunting and fishing, but many choose to leave the hunting grounds for varying periods, something which other barbarians tend to regard as a sign of rootlessness or disloyalty. Zarek. The Zareks count among the barbarians who seem most willing to accept an Ambrian presence in Davakar. Their main settlements are situated along the northern shore of Lake Volgoma, and it is said that they have developed a close partnership with Alisaro Kohinoor, a partnership which probably was established when Monovar, the chieftain of Zarek, helped the Ambrians to destroy his arch-enemy, Haloban of the dead Jazora clan. Odayova. The territory of Clan Odayova spans between Kavosti and Thistlehold, which means that the route between the two settlements traverses their grounds. Hence, one should not be surprised that the Odavs have gotten used to the Ambrian presence and learned to capitalize on it. It is often the people of Odayova who act as intermediaries in contact and trade between Ambrians and barbarians, which means that the clan chieftain, Embasind, lives a much more comfortable life compared to other barbarian leaders. Karoha. Unlike the Odavs, the warmongering Carrots are distrustful, if not hostile, towards the new lords of the realm. This can probably be explained by the fact that Ambrian treasure hunters have invaded their territory during the past decades, scaring game away and attracting elves. Or could it possibly have something to do with what happened to the former ally of Karoha Haloban and his G-Zites? Regardless, the territory of the Karits is far from safe. Vajvod. Southeastern Davakar, particularly the area around the stone fortress Voivodar and river Daudrum, is the home of the Vajvods. The remote location and the relative openness of its inhabitants have made it possible for the Ambrians to gain a firm foothold in the territory, clearly demonstrated by the colony Karos Fen, the trade ships sailing all the way up to the source of the river and the forward base that the Queen's Rangers have in the area. Sarkhan. The Sars of Clan Sarkhan speak in a guttural language, barely comprehensible to other barbarians. They live in self-imposed isolation around an ancient fortress, worshipping the beastly blood daughter and regarding themselves as the true heirs of Symbar. A couple of times a year, Sarian raiders attack other barbarian settlements, but clan chieftain Razameaman places all the blame on rebellious separatists, claims which other clans have opted to believe until proven otherwise. Varako. Furthest south, close to the Ambrian border, the Varaks travel the plains in their wagons. They comprise the smallest clan, which to a large extent is due to the fact that they are especially exposed to attacks from rebellious Sars. With the express permission of Duke Alisaro, the Varaks nowadays often keep to the Ambrian side of the border. And it is said that the Duke is making efforts to end the blood feud which rages between the Varak chieftain Didramon and Monovar of Zarek. High Chieftain Tharaban. The High Chieftain of the Barbarians has his seat on the plateau Kavosti, about 5 days' ride northwest of Thistlehold. Pilgrims who have visited the Sun Temple on Kavosti say that the High Chieftain resides in an impressive stronghold, surrounded by a curtain wall and protected by the guard of the slumbering Wrath. Tharaban himself is not often seen. Sometimes he can be spotted looking out over Kavosti from a balcony on the stronghold, and on occasion he has been observed walking over the plateau on his way to meet with the Huldra, or walking towards the Thingstead, always surrounded by a dozen Wrathguards. Rumors describe him in contradictions, as a skilled diplomat or a complete moron, as a mighty warlord or a weak figurehead whose commands are dictated by the Huldra. Whatever the case, backed up by the 99 Wrathguards, the fur-clad Tharaban is a force to be reckoned with. The Huldra Yeleta. Although he would hardly admit it, not even Commander Iacobo Veara, first among the Knights of the Dying Sun, is comfortable looking Yeleta in the eye. Her grotesque masks, her wild manners and thunderous voice are enough to frighten parents as well as children, and the stories told of her cruelty are hugely popular in the taverns of Indaros. Yeleta instills fear and fascinates. At the same time, most Ambrians cling to the belief that the Huldra, or the Archwitch as some call her, never leaves her home in the caverns piercing the cliff of Kavosti, and some even claim to know that she in reality is nothing more than a wise old crone, powerful but not at all evil. That she is connected to the creatures of Davakar is beyond doubt, but whether or not she is actually allied with them is another question. Maybe she is yet to decide which side she is on, the side of the beasts or that of the humans. Maybe she, and thus the barbarian clans, will make a decision before long. The Church of Prios, the Church of the Sun God Prios, governs a domain of its own in Ambria, a territory large as a duchy centered around the city of Templewall. The first father of Prios resides in the city, selected for life by the Curia, the ruling body of the church, which is comprised of the leaders of its 3 subdivisions, the priesthood, the Templars, and the Twilight Friars. Jesibagai, who now sits on the evening throne at Templewall, was elected from among the Twilight Friars 6 years ago. The Theurgs and Liturgs of the priesthood are responsible for interpreting Prios's commandments and for managing all his temples, from the cathedrals in Indaros and Templewall to the repaired shrine on Kavosti. Their current representative in the Curia is named Annabela Argona and is the sister of Count Alcantor Argona, a bond that the Count is accused of exploiting in the ambition to expand his domain and influence. The Knights of the Dying Sun also called Sun Knights or Templars, are the armed wing of the church. Its well-equipped and highly skilled Templars, who all stem from noble families, played a crucial part at the end of the Great War, a fact which Knight Commander Jacobo Veara never lets anyone forget. Finally, the Twilight Friars, also called Black Cloaks, is a monastic order with its main seat south of Indaros, up in the Titans. Aside from a handful of convents in Ambria's larger settlements, the order manages a convent school in Indaros and is in charge of internal as well as external intelligence activities. The spokesperson of the order, Brother Eumenos, is often heard declaring that whilst the Templars aim their swords towards Ambria's outer enemies, the knife points of the Black Cloaks are aimed at those within. First, Father Jezebel. The man who sits on the evening throne at Temple Wall was born Demain Solage. He was a priest in the battalion that liberated Queen Corinthia from the Dark Lord's prison and was actually the one who made the rescue possible. In a celebrated act of heroism, he walked naked through the unholy firewall that held Corinthia captive and carried her out. The queen escaped with mild burns, while Demain lost his eyes, his hair growth, and sustained severe scarring over his whole body. Even so, nobody has ever heard the faithful Black Cloak complain about his injuries. Unlike Corinthia, he has never made an effort to conceal the scars on his face. He has settled for a blindfold, if only to protect his empty eye sockets from becoming infected. And when the former First Father passed away, there was little question who would succeed him. The Curia only needed an hour's time before proclaiming the ascension of Convent Brother Demain as First Father Jezebel, and they could not have made a better choice. No one loves Prios the way he does. No one fights with such resolve to give the Ambrian people courage enough to please Prios and to replenish his might. Ordo Magica. Roughly a year ago, Ambria's most prominent order for learned studies and mystical schooling, Ordo Magica, relocated from Indaros to Agrella on the shores of Lake Ebel. Grandmaster Seldonio governs an organization with chapters in all larger settlements, as well as a handful of outposts in Davakar. Each chapter is run by a chapter master, under which the masters of the order are sorted. The latter are experts in their respective areas, for instance botany, elf studies, beast lore, and wizardry, and all have a number of novices and adepts working for them. The primary ambition of Ordo Magica is of an explorative nature. Its members seek knowledge for knowledge's sake. They arrange expeditions to both forests and mountains, from which they bring curious artifacts to be studied in search of their properties and applications. Instead of spirituality, the members argue that philosophy must be the primary tool for expanding the understanding of the world, and in the end, they rely on experience and evidence rather than on faith, something which often causes its members to clash with the Yergs and Black Cloaks. But the single-minded search for knowledge does not mean that the order is totally cut off from the rest of civilization. Seldonio appears to be fully aware that he is in need of others. For instance, he needs the Queen's blessing to explore Davakar, the silver thalers of the nobles to finance expeditions, and the rangers to take members of the order along on their patrols. It should also be noted that the order strives to capitalize on knowledge gained and discoveries made, as for instance shown by the vivisectory in Indaros, where ordinary people can pay entrance to bear witness as the masters carve into everything from farm animals to rage trolls and actual abominations. Grandmaster Seldonio. Many a mighty master fell victim to the Great War. Seldonio survived because he was the head of the order and therefore was needed at the War Council far from the front line. Exactly how old he is, he probably does not know himself, but under the name Seldonio, he appears in epics, composed nearly 2 centuries ago. And even if some people blame him for having acted like a coward during the war, there is hardly anyone who doubts that he counts among the mightiest mystics in Ambria. But most powerful, he is not. 3 other masters of the order made it through the war alive: the Stormweaver Variol, Cullinan of the Dead House of Furia, and probably mightiest of the all, the Mind-Warper Eleonara Yellowcat. It is said that these 3 pushed through the relocation of the headquarters to Agrella against Seldonio's will. They wish for peace and quiet and time for studies, and have no sympathy for the Grand Master's interest in Ambria's men and beasts. This has resulted in a situation where Seldonio spends more time at the chapter in Indaros than he does in his chamber in Agrella. And if one is to believe what is whispered among adepts and novices, this may very well mean that Seldonio's days as the head of the order are numbered. The Queen's army. Queen Corinthia is Ambria's commander-in-chief, but most of the day-to-day operation of the army is commanded by the elderly Field Marshal Beremo Herengol. The army is divided into 6 divisions, paid for and maintained by the duchies, and a 7th one belonging to the Grand Duchy of Indarion, serving directly under the Queen. Each division includes infantry, cavalry, as well as archer and tross units. Additionally, the army incorporates the Rangers and the Queen's Guard, called the Panzars. The latter is commanded by General Jomolo and is stationed in a newly restored fortress west of the capital. The Rangers are in most regards detached from the army at large, primarily focused on intelligence work and reconnaissance missions in the border regions. Its commander, Colonel Ravina Kalfas, is said to be one of the Queen's closest friends, and rumors have her pointed out as the next Field Marshal when the current one is forced into retirement. Rumors which makes the blood of the army generals run hot. Beremo Herengol. Beremo stems from a long line of prominent commanders and is regarded by most as the crown jewel of his house, especially because he was highly responsible for the outcome of the Great War. He has been the realm's field marshal for 26 years and is closing in on his 70s, which has accelerated the speculation about him stepping down. But so far nothing indicates that he or the Queen have any such plans. As late as during the New Year's celebrations of Year 21, he spearheaded the honor guard and looked to be in great shape. According to some, in an unnaturally great shape. The rumors surrounding the second most powerful commander in the kingdom are many. There are those who claim that he already is exhausted, but that the Queen refrains from dismissing him because of his long and faithful service. Other gossip states that Beremo is allied with dark forces that fill him with youthful vigor, or that the Old One has some kind of hold over Corinthia which prevents her from relieving him. Envoy Elori. The task of negotiating with Queen Corinthia has ever since her arrival been owned by a towering and very stern elf named Elori. Before the migration, the Ambrians had never had contact with the elven kind, and the unwillingness of the forest people to let them explore Davakar has made them detest the pointy ears as intensely as they hate rage trolls and abominations. Elori himself seems to appreciate the situation. He is seldom seen on the streets of Indaros, and when it happens, he is always on his way to or from the royal palace, escorted by royal guards. It is said that Elori has come to Indaros in search of a peaceful solution to the conflicts between men and elves, but no one doubts that he primarily has been sent to spy. This belief was greatly strengthened the other year when he had a visitor, namely Aloena, the giant she-being who otherwise resides in a grove on the cliff of Karvosti. What was said between them is not to be known, but since then, Elori is sighted more often. The taunts and objects thrown at him bother him as little as ever before. The Iron Pact. The elves speak of the Iron Pact, but exactly what that is and what function such an alliance would serve is highly debatable. According to legends told at the taverns in Indaros, the elf wardens of Davokar claimed that the human race consented to leaving the forest in their care and swore never to set foot in the depth of Davokar again. This promise is supposed to have been endorsed by a long list of human rulers, including Corinthia's forefather Argalo and the ancestors of the current clan chiefs Rabayamon and Razameaman. It is also said that the human rulers gave the elf lord Eneano a gift to seal the treaty 6,000 rings of iron. Among the barbarians, there are some legends which could be interpreted as proof of the existence and legitimacy of the Iron Pact. On the other hand, they could as well be based on lies told to the barbarians by devious pointy ears. Evidently, the Ambrian nobility have opted to put their faith in the latter interpretation, even though the elves every day make good on the threat to seek vengeance on humans who violate the treaty. Davokar. To produce a summarized account of Davokar Forest is a challenge, partly because of its varied and changeable character, partly because so much of it is yet to be reliably mapped. For centuries, the barbarian clans have kept to the outer areas of the forest, from the edge to about 4 days' march inwards. The reason for this is said to be twofold. On the one hand, the outskirts contain all they need in terms of prey and useful plants. On the other hand, they abide by a long list of strict taboos that ban them from entering the deep. The witches claim that Davokar is sleeping, that the forest must not be disturbed, that death and destruction will follow if the edicts are violated. The strategists and explorers of Queen Corinthia, including Ordo Magica, generally agree that the witches exaggerate. Instead, they cling to the belief that the taboos echo threatening warnings made by elves, and that the edicts primarily are devised to keep peace with the wardens of the forest. But the strategists also call for caution. The Ambrians still know far too little about Davokar's past, about the fallen civilization of Symbaroum and the origin of the abominations, to be able to rule out that the witches' legends contain 1 or 2 grains of truth. Whatever the truth may be, Davokar is there, at the threshold of Ambria, the promised land of Corintha Nightbane. It rests there with its enormous riches in terms of natural resources and treasure-filled ruins. To leave it in peace is completely at odds with the Ambrian disposition. Maybe that same disposition can account for the Ambrians' obstinate attempts to explain the inexplicable. The description of Davokar found below is based on the duality principle put forth by Malioanos, a renowned master of the Order. It is perhaps the simplest and most comprehensible description of Davokar to date. Hence, it is simplistic, in some cases even misleading, but in the end, it will give you a hint of what awaits in the shadowy halls beneath Davokar's treetops. Bright Davokar. Malioanos is stationed as Master of the Order at the Indaros chapter and is highly religious. The latter is evident in how he describes Davokar as divided into 2 main regions, based on whether or not the sunlight can penetrate the leaves to reach the ground. Many of his slanderers argue that he has designed the classification in close partnership with Father Paeonio, first theurg, at the Cathedral of Martyrs in the capital. Malioanos describes, not entirely incorrectly, the outskirts as strikingly beautiful and remarkably lush. During summer, beams of sunlight shimmer in humid air, filled with soaring seeds and dancing insects, making the moss and ground blossoms gleam. The fiery splendor of the autumns is even more striking, and the virgin white of the winter calm also has its fair share of admirers. However, Malioanos utters a word of warning. No matter how beautiful the natural surroundings may seem, you can be sure that they are full of hidden dangers. Fruits and berries can be lethal on ingestion, and many inexperienced wanderers have reached their end at the bottom of a marsh that was mistaken for solid ground. As for its creatures, Malianos describes Bright Davokar as the domain of barbarians and prey animals. Of course, this implies that it is here predators come to hunt, packs of meerkats, jackars and etterherds, as well as solitary rage trolls and even famished abominations. Adding to that, the elves must be mentioned. The cautious spring elves apparently love nothing better than to subject human wanderers to all kinds of more or less deadly mischiefs, while the hot-headed summer elves are happy to use the same travelers as targets for their perfectly aimed arrows, not least if they are in or are traveling toward areas deemed especially sensitive by the wardens. Finally, some words about the ruins of the outskirts. The southern regions and the area surrounding Kavosti have already been thoroughly explored by the Queen's Rangers, Ordo Magica's expeditions and independent fortune hunters, leading to the discovery of sites like Saran's Pyramid, the columns of Haganor, and the grand aqueducts of Clearwell. But that does not mean that there is nothing more to unearth. Even today, the lucky and well-prepared may still find untouched ruins close to the southern border. And if one dares to venture further north or to delve deeper down into the soil, the chance of interesting discoveries are multiplied. Dark Davokar. Beyond the elusive border which Malianos has established between bright and dark, there are regions that should not be traversed without great care, detailed preparations, and a sizable company of sword-wielding companions. In contrast to the outskirts, the depth is riddled with grave dangers, and there are neither barbarians nor ranger patrols that can come to your rescue. In short, one never ventures into the dark of Davokar without being prepared to risk one's life in the hope of gaining riches, knowledge, or fame. According to Malianos, Dark Davokar is characterized by a dense and wild vegetation that closes out all light. Here, the flaws of the duality principle are revealed. The few fortune hunters who have traveled into the dark and returned with their health and minds intact testify that the sunbeams actually do reach the ground in there. They can also tell you that this certainly does not mean that the horrors go away. Whatever is true or false when it comes to the many postulates by Malianos, there are reports speaking of a very devious nature in Davokar's inner regions, a nature whose threats lurk where one would least expect, threats in the form of bottomless streams, tiny but poisonous creatures, overgrown sinkholes, and carnivorous or bloodthirsty vines. There is also talk of infections and parasites which make their victims insane, paralyzed, rabid, or undead, of ancient curses with similar effects, even of areas defying all reason where it snows in the summer, where plants shimmer from some inner glow, and where nightmares inexplicably come to life. But neither Malianos nor Lucrezia, nor some other authority on the nature of Davokar can claim to actually know which of these statements correspond with reality, if any. The truth is just as uncertain when it comes to the inhabitants of the deep, that there are raving abominations, beastly rage trolls, and packs of trickle-stings and hunger wolves may be concluded from the stories told by returning explorers. And maybe there is some truth to the rumors about a predatory and bloodthirsty barbarian clan, even if its dwelling is yet to be found. But when there is talk about shape-shifting creatures of otherworldly origins, bone-pale elf warriors, possessed mastodons and cunning dragons, the testimonies are far fewer and less reliable. The same goes for the barbarian stories about shadowy beings like Lord Bog and the Hawthorn Hag, ancient creatures who, according to legend, are as powerful as they are wrathful. The problem is that those who come across the residents of the forest do not often get the opportunity to return with their tales, and a majority of the lucky ones return in a state which makes it hard to believe what they have to say. What drives Ambrian explorers to defy the dangers is, of course, the hope of finding treasures from the days of Symbaroum. Malianos makes no effort to hide the fact that the further into Davokar you travel, the greater is your chance of finding well-preserved and rich ruins. But he also points out that first, the ruins of the Dark are often overgrown or hard to find, since all that remains is below ground. Second, that they always are inhabited by someone or something ready to protect its turf. And even if one should take this always with a pinch of salt, reports from both the Rangers and Ordo Magica suggest that his warnings are warranted. On the other hand, venturing into the dark may still be worth the risk. Judging by the fortune salvaged by Iasogoi Brigo during one single visit to the ruins of Odaban, one who finds the path to places like Saraclaw, Dakovac, or even Simbar will hardly return empty-handed, if they but return at all. Travels in Davokar. As soon as you have acquired an explorer's license, you are free to set foot in the forest. If you keep to the charted route between Thistlehold and Kavosti, or the one between the forest edge and the outposts established in the woods, you can feel quite safe since they are patrolled by the Queen's Rangers. But should you divert even slightly, you must be prepared for nasty surprises. In the outskirts, it is possible to travel by horse, although not at a very high speed since there are no paved roads. In the long run, it is often preferable to walk and lead the animal by the halter. If so, you can cover 2 to 3 miles a day, depending on the terrain and the density of the vegetation. You would do well to bring lots of water and dried meat on your journey, since the streams and springs of the forest sometimes are infected, and since open fires tend to attract unwelcome guests to your campsite. In Davokar, every meal may be your last, if you are not careful to take the right precautions. Deeper in the woods, riding is rarely an option, and having the equipment tied to a pack animal can be a very bad idea. There is a significant risk that the animal will bolt at the first sight or whiff of a rage troll, leaving you to face the horrors of Davokar empty-handed. No, to Dark Davokar, you never go without a number of companions, including a skilled guide who knows to avoid dangers and who can find clean water as well as edible plants and prey. In the Game Master's Guide on page 183, you will find more and more detailed information on travels in Davokar, but simply put, every journey into Davokar is hazardous. Those who are not sufficiently prepared may very well find their first excursion to be their last. Symbar. It is said that all barbarians in the Davokar region stem from the same civilization, an empire called Symbaroum that supposedly had its high seat located in what today is the center of Davokar. The legends about the fall of Symbaroum are numerous, most of them variations on the theme, that its last emperor angered some form of supreme being and thereby caused the empire's ruin. Many dream of finding the heart of Symbaroum, called Symbar by witches and barbarians. Many have tried, but as yet no one has succeeded. Or to be precise, no one has yet returned with credible and publicly announced stories about a successful expedition to Symbar. But that does not deter fortune hunters from planning and launching new expeditions, led by men and women who all claim to have irrefutable evidence to guide them. Because as long as the tales about Symbar's treasures outweighs the stories about its horrors, the allure of the myth will live on and claim life after life after life. Thistlehold. It should have been the simplest of excursions, but the expedition to the ruins of Old Odaban ended in disaster. Already at dawn on the 4th day, we encountered a wounded rage troll, struck by more than a dozen elven arrows and eager to get company on the road to the beyond. He made 2 of my friends tag along. Another 2 followed the day after, victimized by a fever caused by the rage troll's bites. and before we had travelled half the distance, 3 more were dead. Keros was lured out on treacherous quagmires by fairies one night. Fabia's arm was severed by a blight-stricken elk, and she bled to death. And our goblin guide, Lurks, took his own life after having received a deadly gift of a poisonous trickle sting. By then, only me and one of our sellswords were alive. My hope had fled, my heart welcomed death as a dear old friend. But the warrior dragged me south, forcing my legs into action. His will burned hot, and yet his effort would have been pointless were it not for another fiery flame. When my strength was all but drained, he took me on his shoulders and carried me up, step by step, branch by branch, along the stem of a towering pine. And as we reached the top, he slapped me across the cheek, pointing to the south. There, still far away, flamed the fire that gave me strength to carry on, the beacon of Thistlehold, a bonfire raised above the moonlit ocean of leaves, calling me to safety and warmth and a bolstered mattress. That is how I survived, as so many before me. Mayor Nightpitch's sanctuary is the harbour of all explorers and fortune hunters, from which we embark on our journeys and towards which we then strive. Background. When it became known that the Queen's mother had taken ill, and the House of Kohinoor announced that a sizable reward would be given to anyone who could provide a cure, Lassifor Nightpitch knew that his time had come. Together with his companion, the barbarian witch Yagaba, he collected an armful of twilight thistle from a secret location deep inside Davakar and delivered it to the Queen's medicus. He waived part of the reward in exchange for a title as Prince of the Realm over the area previously ruled by the warlord Haloban. What remained of the payment was used to fund the construction of a brand new town, right on the threshold of Davakar. That is how Thistlehold came to be, born out of a retired fortune hunter's dream to secure his own future, and at the same time do something in benefit of his exiled brothers and sisters. The walled town is today neither more nor less than it was meant to be. A fairly safe place at the brink of Davakar, where the people of Queen Corinthia can find shelter, rest, trade, and amusements before, as well as after a possible return from expeditions into the forest, that Mayor Nightpitch lives a comfortable life financed by tolls and taxes no one begrudge him, especially since a part of the income passes on to the Queen's treasury, and because the founding of Thistlehold has facilitated trade and other connections with the barbarian clans. The Birchwood Palisade and most of the buildings within were erected over the course of the summer and fall of Year 13, largely thanks to the goblin tribe that Mayor Nightpitch had befriended during his travels. Today, the town has about 6,000 permanent residents, but counting visitors, peasants from surrounding areas, and people passing through there, are about 1,000 people inside the walls at any given moment. Order is maintained by a well-paid town watch, led by Lassifor's brother, and mostly composed of veterans of the Great War. Misbehavers can expect punishments which often are harsher than the ones handed out in Indaros. After repeated petty crimes, the wrongdoer can find himself being relieved of all earthly possessions and tossed out through the town gates, sometimes a couple of fingers or a hand poorer. The boundaries between the formal tax-paying citizens and its guest labourers are sharp as the edge of a barbarian war axe. So long as a citizen refrains from unprovoked murders and torture, he or she can do almost anything to the guest labourers without risking reprimands. Other forms of temporary inhabitants are treated more fairly, but if they do not have a renowned name or cannot flaunt signs of wealth or boast of possessing extraordinary skills, they must accept being greeted with a cold, almost contemptuous attitude. In Thistlehold, might is right. The mightier the person, the greater his rights. That is nothing to be ashamed of, but to take pride in. Overview. The Palisade, 30 feet high and made of heavy birch logs harvested at the forest edge, encircles a settlement that has become denser and more towering with time. The broad streets that were deemed necessary to stop the flaming bursts of elven arrows from lighting up the whole town have, with few exceptions, been replaced by narrow alleys between buildings that have expanded in both width and height. To counteract the negative effects of such a change, more of the woods have been cut down, so that the distance between the north gate and the forest edge now spans about 200 paces. Additionally, the number of towers on the northern portion of the palisade has been doubled, and all are equipped with both ballistas and catapults. Nonetheless, the Hold's more prominent citizens have chosen to build their homes on the south side of town. This is where you find the fenced wooden palace of Mayor Nightpitch, the Queen's Legation, the Tower of Ordo Magica, and a number of fancy residences, many belonging to some of Ambria's greatest explorers, Iasogoi Brigo, Lysindra Goldengrasp, Elmea Rabbit's Foot, and Gorakai the Young, he who discovered the aqueducts and the sunken city of Clearwell. The centre of town comprises the hub of all commerce in Ambria's northern region, especially when it comes to the trade in finds recovered from Davokar and handicrafts manufactured by barbarians. Lined up around the bronze well at the Antique Plaza are market stands for buying and selling goods, but you will also find the agency of Mother Mehira and Father Sarvola's missionary station close by. To the east, west and north of the centre family homes, guest houses and taverns lay side by side, more mixed up compared to the southern district where family homes are in majority. An exception can be found in the district surrounding the Toad Square. That area has developed into the town's centre for pleasures and intoxication, a development that gained serious momentum 2 years ago as the pleasure palace called Salons of Symbaroum was established. Surroundings. North of Thistlehold, there is a small strip of open ground before the forest begins. It is commonly known as the Firebreak, but is of course mainly there to prevent the people and beasts of the woods from approaching unseen. High roads run both towards Indaros and from east to west between the forts Otrasenja and Otradorno, towers that have kept their names from when they were part of Haloban's defences. Along the road, linking the forts manned, watchtowers are posted about 1,000 paces apart, and a moat is under construction 12 paces wide and 15 paces deep, protecting the lowland from the beasts of Davokar. Despite the fact that a pass or cash payment is needed to enter the town, the founding of Thistlehold has revitalized the whole region. The noble house Argona has its estate nearby and supports a village close to its residence, about 1 day on horseback south of the Hold. Furthermore, the smaller house Erebus manages the land directly south and west of the town, and House Dorego the land to the east. As a consequence, farmlands stretch out all the way between Otrasenja and Otradorno, a popular hunting ground for the beasts who manage to cross the high road undetected. Closer to the palisade, on the road to Indaros, rests the permanent tent camp called Blackmoor, or more teasingly, Thistle Scold. Many are the residents of Blackmoor who work in the Hold, but whose employers are unwilling to pay for them to live in town, builders, servants, washers, housemaids, and so forth. But with time, Blackmoor has developed into a refuge for all fortune hunters, pilgrims, and independent explorers who either cannot or will not pay for the protection of Mayor Nightpitch, and that has in turn given rise to more permanent inns, taverns, and other establishments. So in spite of total anarchy and a lack of formal blessing from the Queen, Blackmoor is rapidly turning into a permanent settlement, and should it keep going at the same rate, it will not be long before its population exceeds that of Thistlehold. Another permanent colony can be found about an hour's ride to the east, directly south of the high road. there dwells Carabadoc, the goblin tribe that has built most of Thistlehold and whose members even today perform most of the heavy and dirty duties for Mayor Nightpitch. They harvest and transport lumber, sweep the streets before daybreak, and provide service as dishwashers, bellow boys, messengers, latrine cleaners, and moat diggers. To be fair, the goblins are good for more than that. Foremost among the Carabadocs are the chief of the tribe, Idlefons, and the former guide to the wilds, Garm Worm Wriggler. Other notable members are the chimney crawler, Ipa, hoopnut maker Ulf, and the ogre brothers Koolds and Clagger, who are hired when something heavy must be carried in the hold or during excavations in Davokar. In Daros, 9 years of toiling in the marshes and my body was spent. I returned just the other day as the sun climbed over the ravens and the mists danced along the surface of River Dodrum. I couldn't believe my eyes. I felt like a stranger. Sure, I recognized the scaffoldings, the crowds, and the sounds of voices mingled with treading shoes, boots, and hooves. What amazed me was instead all that had sprouted from the racket, the pillars at the harbour basin, the dome of the Cathedral of Martyrs, not to mention the marvellous palace of our Queen. And there was more. The pavement on the streets, the 4-story buildings lining the streets, the statues on the squares, the convent school that I found where my favourite tavern used to be. But let's return to your question. I am lying here bleeding because I have been successively stoned, stabbed, whipped, beaten, and finally stabbed again. I was stoned at midnight, as I happened to end up in the middle of a standoff between two groups of fancy but remarkably brutal dwarves. I received a stabbing in response when I asked one of the dwarves for mercy, and was later whipped by a drunken witch hunter who mistook me for a blight beast. The witch hunter chased me all the way to Old Cadizar, where I stumbled upon a trio of goblins who beat down on me smiling. And the final cut came from someone I misidentified as a little girl. I thought she was going to help me, but then she searched my pockets and stabbed me in disappointment when they turned out to be empty. That being said, I would truly appreciate if you could stop smirking, walk away, and let me die in peace. Background. Indaros is built on the well-preserved ruins of the city-state Lindaros. Regarding the latter, not much more is known than what has been told by the barbarians. The contact between Alboretor and Lindaros was never developed because of the great barrier called the Titans. The general belief is that the city-state was ruined about 2 centuries was self-inflicted, that the scourge was sent from higher powers as punishment for their arrogant and slothful ways. The ruins of Lindaros were for a long time shunned and feared by the people still living in the area. But as the Ambrians arrived at the shores of the Dudrum, they were greeted by a walled barbarian village situated inside the ruined city. After a short siege and an even shorter parley, the chieftain of Cadizar agreed to surrender and to dissolve his clan. In return, he was awarded the title Baron Manvar Grendel and was given a piece of land to govern. The oldest daughter of the newly appointed baron refused to submit herself to the rule of the intruders and eloped to the mountains along with 200 Cadizans. The rest of the clan folk stayed and were soon put to work by the new lords of the land. Thanks to thousands of prisoners of war, Lindaros was rapidly transformed into the new high seat of Queen Corinthia. When she arrived with her court, 7 years after the Forerunners, a respectable palace was already waiting for her, and the basic structure of streets and city blocks was also in place. With her arrival, the development gained momentum. The palace was remodeled and expanded. Lots of buildings were demolished to leave room for bigger and more beautiful ones. Parks and squares were established, most of them crowned with pompous monuments. Grandiose constructions like the Cathedral of Martyrs, the Dome and the harbour basin were based on foundations of old Lindaros and could be finished in a matter of years. 14 years have now passed since the arrival of the Queen in the city keeps growing in a way which many deem to be unsustainable. According to estimates, about 100,000 people call the capital their home, but many of them live under harsh conditions within the walls of Old Kadizar or in the refugee camp southeast of there. And the immigrants keep coming. Lots of people arrive on a daily basis from the dying south. Some have been invited because of their special skills or thanks to siblings already there. Other are hopefuls lured by the inflated rumors of Indaros's splendor. And even if many are referred to colonies in the west or to work at the edge of Davakar, one may wonder if, and for how long, the authorities will be able to maintain some kind of order. Overview. The Ambrian capital Indaros is situated about 3 days' march north of the Titans, a short distance west of where River Nura blends with the mighty Dudrum. The city provides a sample of the kingdom at large. In Indaros you will find the war-related, the learned, the commercial and the cultured mixed up with barbarians, goblins and a growing horde of impoverished refugees. It should also be mentioned that Indaros is a construction site. Constructions are underway all over, and it is not unusual for relatively new buildings to be torn down in order to make room for newer and more functional ones. If you approach the capital by freighter along the Dowdrum, you will probably disembark at the cargo dock in the east. From there, you may crisscross your way south between the warehouses, in which case you will reach the slummy neighborhood inhabited by the city's many hard-working laborers, construction workers, maids, servants, dock workers, and so on. And should you continue further south, you would end up among the tents, huts, and wagons of the refugee camp. Had you instead turned westward at the cargo port's marketplace, called the Mongers Square, you would have passed through the wall of Old Kadizar. The city block is composed of a combination of Lindaros's ruins and barbarian clay houses, also mixed up with a few remnants of ancient Symbaroum. The population is similar to the one occupying the laborers' quarters, possibly with the difference that the criminal elements are more noticeable. When stepping through the western gate of Old Kadizar, you are greeted by the sounds from the harbour district. The port, at the centre of the city, is nowadays mostly used for transporting passengers to the village Baron's Berth on the Dowdrum's northern shore. The warehouses that once stood by the docks have been replaced by taverns, dives and other establishments for pleasure and relaxation. Gazing south when standing by the harbour basin, you can see Corinthia's palace reach for the skies, and you also get a glimpse of the artisans' district, which continues west of the harbour district. The most skilled craftsmen, or at least the most renowned, have their shops between the harbour and the palace, while those set up in the west must work harder, both in order to produce high-quality wares and to entice customers. North of the westernmost artisans' quarter is a shabby district that so far is the domain of the city's more or less successful artists. If you instead walk further to the south, you will soon find yourself in Indaros's finest district. Here, the Grand Cathedral of Martyrs lies a short walk from the triple towers of Ordo Magica, and in another direction, the convent school of the Last Light. By the wall which surrounds the palace district, you also find the well-guarded residences and guest houses where the lords and ladies of the realm stay when visiting the capital. Regarding the atmosphere in Indaros, one could describe the city as being in a constant state of commanded euphoria. The people celebrate their victorious past, their glorious future, and not least their beloved sovereign. One day, a week is dedicated to festivities, parades, and spectacles, staged as a reminder of important incidents during the war, or meant to demonstrate the Ambrian superiority over barbarians and the new homeland. But underneath the joyous surface, are both the great sorrow over all things lost and a great many problems that need to be handled. Many hunger. Most people are forced to work extremely hard and under grim conditions, in the city or as serfs on the estates surrounding it. A vast majority of the refugees are perceived as being unreliable or useless and are kept in check with arms and a harsh city watch. Adding to that are the intrigues and schemes characterizing the dealings among the noble houses. Indaros is a city of great contrasts, and just like the newly constructed buildings along the muddy banks of the Dudrum, she is constantly balancing on the verge of total collapse. Surroundings. Indaros and the land surrounding it belong to the Grand Duchy of Carinthia, called Indarian. Count Demetro Viara governs the land west of the capital, Count Edugai Brigo the land to the east, while the Queen herself has direct control over a vast area to the south. About a dozen towns and villages lay within a day's ride from the city, the biggest ones being New Viara and Brigo's Bridge, close to the estates of the counts. Most notable among the villages are Prios Pass and Decadina. The former is located where the mountain road from Albaretor reaches the lowlands and traverses River Veloma. Aside from its inhabitants working closely with the nearby monastery of the Twilight Friars, Prios Pass has developed into a border crossing, where refugees from Albaretor have to register before traveling further into the Promised Land. While waiting for the certificate declaring them to be healthy and suitable for work and lodging in the Queen's realm, the immigrants all live in a huge camp south of the river. Others try to avoid passing through the village or make attempts to bribe their way to swift passage and a signed certificate, adding to the workload of the Ranger border patrols. The Rangers stay fully occupied, rooting out corruption and chasing after those who are denied entry to Ambria, but still try to find a way into the Promised Land. Decadina, high seat of the barony of New Decanor located in the southeast, is another story. Late in the spring of year 20, Baron Mergai declared himself independent and appointed himself king, something which happened after Carinthia had publicly ordered him to build a sun temple in Decadina. The Baron refused, accusing the Queen and the First Father of wrongfully exalting Prios at the expense of all other gods. The Sun Church immediately threatened to brand him a heretic and a servant of the Dark Lords, but an overwhelming majority of Baron Mergai's subjects appeared to welcome and revere their new king. Adding to that, a slight increase in people migrating to the barony has been noticed, obviously Ambrians who share Mergai's spiritual beliefs. The situation is tense, to say the least, and in most of Indaros's taverns, the main question is debated daily. Will the Queen allow the transgression to pass unpunished, or will she accept the offer from Commander Iacobo Veara and let the Templars deal with the heretics? Aside from the above-mentioned examples, life in the smaller towns and villages is often more pleasant than life in the city. But there is a price to pay in the form of constant threats from local bands of robbers. A handful of bandit chiefs are held up in the mountains, the most infamous ones being Baron Manvar Grendel's obstinate daughter, called the Ice Witch, and the Ogre Mound, and his gang of goblins and tamed rage trolls. The robbers attack villages, ambush travelers on the high roads and in mountain passes, or strike at ships moving along the rivers. Fortunately, in most cases, the bands are composed of 5 to 10 desperate and not very organized ruffians without any other means to survive. But if you encounter one of the bigger bands, you will need more than a handful of caravan guards to protect cargo and lives. Besides the threats from robbers, life in Indaros and its surroundings is relatively safe compared to other regions. Yes, refugees come carrying horrible diseases from the motherland, Davakar's predatory beasts and abominations reach the lowlands at times, and poverty and misery sometimes spark revolts in the area. but such challenges can almost always be dealt with before they turn disastrous. The Queen's capital contains both the strongest muscles and the sharpest brains, and when they team up, there is no threat that is too great to handle, or rather, no such threat has so far been revealed. Kavos. I have never been so scared, not before, nor ever since. Frozen to the bone, soaked by melting snow and by blood seeping from open wounds, I crawled towards the safety of the plateau. My head ached from memories of the night before. The roar of mighty wings, the fire in his eyes, Saren's cries in torment, the escape, the breathless escape. As I reached the plateau, I stumbled and fell. I rolled over on my back and pressed the one remaining artifact to my chest. People and torches wavered around me. Humans in blood-red armor were soon joined by a towering wildling with serious eyes. And I was hoisted from the ground. I was carried trembling with fear until I landed in the hot glow of a fire. There she waited for me, and for my treasure. The Huldra was a voice, a bone-white mask, and two embers that flared hotter than both the fire and the eyes of the crypt-walker. "How dare you?" The question was an accusation, as if I was guilty of unspeakable crimes. It is not a lone bear that sleeps whose fur you unwittingly tug at. It is all bears and all other beings to add. A slumbering horde fed on anger and shame. And you come here carrying a crowing rooster and a decoy. She pulled the figurine from my grip, eyed it at arm's length, before giving it to her serious friend, asking him to throw it into the deepest trench of Lake Volgoma. Then her gaze turned back at me. For 1,000 years she has slept. Her nightmares have been violent, but manageable. You are not to blame, but you are guilty just the same. And blame aside, your suffering will neither be milder nor greater than any others. When Davokar awakens. Background: the cliff of Kavosti, the age-old meeting place and thingstead of the barbarian folks, rises like an island out of a sea of leaves, about 5 days' ride northwest of Thistlehold. Not much is known regarding its early days, but legends suggest that it first housed a number of temples, and that it later became a refuge when the civilization of Symbaroum began to crumble. An indication to back that assumption is that the temple ruin rebuilt by the Sun Church is evidently older than the magnificent stronghold of the High Chieftain. Whatever the truth may be, the barbarians have used the plateau for hundreds of years. Legends say it was the threatening hordes of the Spider King that 5 centuries ago caused the clans to appoint a common paramount leader and follow him into battle. The leader still exists, but lost his authority as soon as the threat was taken care of. Like his predecessors, the current High Chieftain, Tharaban, has no more power than what the clan leaders grant him if and when they need him to mediate or adjudicate in particular disputes, sometimes in peaceful negotiations, sometimes acting as judge when blood feuds must be settled through brutal duels. To aid him, Tharaban has Kavosti's witch node, spearheaded by the Huldra Yaleta. Formally, the witches are advisors in all affairs dealt with on the cliff, providing guidance based on their profound understanding of the clans and the people. However, persistent gossip maintains that they are more than that it in fact is the Huldra who leads the barbarians with Tharaban as her mouthpiece, a notion which has become especially popular in Indaros, where skalds and minstrels fondly make use of Yaleta as the star of their more terrifying pieces. 5 years ago, the High Chieftain and the Huldra were faced with their greatest challenge in centuries. It was Ambrian explorers who first discovered the sun-like symbols on the plateau's ancient temple ruin. They were followed first by missionaries, later by heavily armored sun knights intent on cleansing the cliff of savages. The Templars attacked, but were after a bloody day of combat, driven back by the High Chieftain's wrath guards. Long and trying negotiations ensued that finally ended in an agreement by which the Church of Prios was given the right to both remain on Kavosti and to restore the temple ruin. At about the same time, Queen Corinthia sent the eldest son of House Grendel to the cliff as her envoy. The exact reasons behind the outcome of the negotiations remain unclear, but apparently Kavosti's symbolic importance is not great enough for the clans to rally in its defense. In addition, there are many who claim that the High Chieftain and the Huldra, to some extent, can appreciate having the Ambrians around as allies in the fight against the Dark of Davokar. In spite of the fact that Kavosti rests in the more open and brighter parts of the forest, it is not spared from encounters with corrupt monstrosities. Any barbarian can testify that the attacks from both beasts and abominations have grown more numerous over the past decade. Some whisper that the witches have foreseen such a development and that they are preparing for something called the resurrection of Davokar. And even if the clan folks tend to accuse the Ambrian people of having upset the woods, this may explain why the High Chieftain and the Huldra seeks peaceful agreements instead of war. If Davokar truly awakens, it may prove to be a bad thing to have hostile Templars, Panzars, and Ambrian mystics at your back. Overview. Today the plateau can be described as divided into three main areas, those of the Barbarians, the Sun Church, and Aloina. The road to the top winds up along the eastern side of the cliff and ends at the combined meeting place and Thingstead, where visiting barbarians erect their tents and park their wagons. By the thousands during important gatherings, considerably fewer on average days. If you walk south through the shrubbery covering the flat plateau, you will soon pass the stronghold of the High Chieftain and eventually end up at a fault line. A rocky wall between 30 and 50 feet tall, spanning the surface from east to west. At its midpoint is the entrance to the cave-like dwelling of the Witch Node, and should you follow the wall westwards, you would soon arrive at a camp inhabited by pilgrims and other visitors to the temple. The quickest and easiest way to the upper level of the fault line runs through the Witch's Caves. But since they are reluctant to have their home used as a transit route, a provisional bridge made out of two gigantic pine trunks has been established next to the campsite. The temple itself rests by the upper bridgehead, and further than that, people seldom have the need or longing to walk, because in the towering grove found at the southern tip of the cliff lives Aloina, a female being, 10 feet tall and believed to be of elven offspring, who is said not to be very hospitable. The atmosphere on Kavosti is characterized by a nervous calm that sometimes turns into tense watchfulness. The general feeling is that the threat from Davokar's beasts and beings continues to grow, and adding to that is the constant mistrust between barbarians and representatives of the Sun Church. At times the calm is shattered, a priest is attacked by harsh words or a thrown pebble on his way across the plateau. A lone Wrathguard encounters a similar situation while patrolling the campsite, instances which make both groups fear the start of a revenge spiral. But as soon as elven arrows start raining from the sky, or the bronze bell of the stronghold warns about inbound beasts, all past transgressions are forgotten, and blood-red. Wrathguards are seen fighting side by side with Templars in shining armor. Hopefully that order of things will prevail in the years to come. Surroundings. Kavosti lies deep within the woods, and when standing on the plateau, you see nothing but forest, whichever way you turn. Looking east, you can detect distinct patterns in the foliage, darker and denser the further your gaze wanders. In all other directions, the panorama is characterized by leafy forests, sometimes intersected by rivers and lakes or darker patches of evergreens, but mainly of a nature which allows the rays of the sun to penetrate the treetops. According to legend, the area surrounding Kavosti was densely populated in Symbarian times, and remnants of the old civilization can be found here and there. Much of it has already been mapped and explored for treasures, as for instance the mighty pyramid of Sarand and the deep-reaching earth towers by the Black Leech Rift. But the further you travel from the cliff, the more likely you are to find untouched ruins. The barbarians regard all remnants of Symbaroum as taboo and are not happy to welcome treasure hunters to the plateau carrying their finds with them. But most obey Tharaban's dictate to let the Ambrians be, or rather, to suit themselves. A few can even take it a step further and trade in information about virgin ruins, provided that the price is right. There are not many settlements close to Kavosti. As previously stated, the Sun Church and a horde of goblins are about to explore and restore another temple ruin 3 days to the east. Aside from that, the Bayaga clan has one of its campsites about 1 day's march to the north, and the Odayova clan's main settlement is about as far to the south. Rumors also speak about 2 groups of free settlers living in the area, one at the northern shores of Lake Volgoma, another by the forest edge west of Kavosti. But if that is true, their inhabitants are very elusive and never make an effort to visit the Cliff of the Barbarians. Whoever you are, wherever you're from, whatever you believe and think you are able to accomplish, none of it matters. I've seen fully armored, battle-hardened knights weep from exhaustion. I've heard masters of Ordo Magica try to yell with throats closed up with fear. I know of 1 or 2 master burglars who've been mutilated by its ancient traps. No, tell you what, neither a strong arm nor a head full of smarts is enough to survive Davakar. The squire outlives the knight if he only has perseverance enough. The apprentices of the master have a bigger chance to come back alive if they but face its horrors without fear. Yes, any child would fare better and live longer than the Thief King of Ambria, if only it traded arrogance for caution. You may scoff and sigh and roll your sky blues, but be warned. A well-developed aptitude, the right sort of schooling and pricey gear is not enough for the true adventurer. With that, you can get started, but it's rarely enough to get you to your destination and never enough to get you back out, if not combined with patience, guts, and a bewitching amount of forethought. Truth slurred forth by Erdaro One-Eye at the Rose Garden Thistlehold. I have given you now a short description about the world of Symbaroum. Now, it's up to you. Check the description for more information and a link to this book online. Take care now.